Marshall Turner stood in his cluttered garage in the small town of Ashford, Norfolk, the familiar cold steel of a wrench solid in his strong, calloused hands. At 34, he had built his modest construction business from scratch, starting with a battered old Ford Ranger and a toolbox he'd inherited from his late father. Now, Turner Builders employed over 40 people and had just secured the prestigious contract to renovate Ashford's Victorian Town Hall, a beloved historic landmark. The soft hum of an engine rolling into the driveway made Marshall's lips curl into a tired but genuine smile. After 8 years of marriage, the sound of Emma's silver Vauxhall Astra was still the sweetest melody to his ears. He first met Emma Clark at a quaint cafe near her accountancy firm, where she'd been buried in spreadsheets during her lunch break. She was a sharp-minded woman with a precise, calculating gaze and a laugh that could brighten the gloomiest British drizzle. "Marshall, you in there making a racket again?" Emma called from the kitchen doorway, her tone teasing, laced with affection. "Just fixing old Mrs. Jenkins' lawnmower," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "She dropped it off this morning, said it's been playing up." Emma appeared in the garage entrance, still dressed in her navy-tailored suit from Branson and Company, the mid-sized accountancy firm where she'd worked for 3 years. Her normally vibrant green eyes were shadowed with fatigue, the kind that no amount of tea could chase away. "Long day?" Marshall asked, noticing the slight tension in her posture. "The usual," she sighed, brushing a stray auburn lock behind her ear. "Mr. Branson's been pushing us hard at the moment. Big audit coming up for the Eastbourne Group." But there was something else in her voice, a hesitation that Marshall hadn't heard before. Marshall had met Simon Branson only twice, once at the firm's Christmas party 2 years ago and again at a charity gala last spring. Both times, the man struck him as the type who'd happily step on the Queen's corgis to climb the corporate ladder. Simon was in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a rehearsed smile that never quite reached his sharp blue eyes. He drove a sleek Jaguar, favored bespoke suits, and had that look about him, like he was permanently sizing people up from above. "So, how's the town hall project coming along?" Emma asked, expertly changing the subject whenever work stress took hold. "Foundation inspection passed this morning," Marshall said, closing the lawnmower's casing and giving the pull cord a yank. "The engine roared to life on the first try. We're starting interior demolition next week. Mrs. Jenkins is going to be chuffed." That evening, they settled on their back porch, sharing a bottle of red wine as the sun dipped below the rolling Norfolk countryside. This was their sacred ritual, a few stolen moments before the world clamored back in. Emma rested her head lightly on Marshall's shoulder. "Remember when we first looked at this place?" she murmured. "You said the kitchen was too tiny and the garden was a jungle. And you said I could fix both," he teased, smiling. "You were right about the garden," she smiled back. "Still working on the kitchen, though." "Rome wasn't built in a day," he said with a grin. "Besides, Rome didn't have Mrs. Jenkins bringing over broken appliances every week." They laughed together, the kind of laughter that made the cold evening feel warm. Marshall had no way of knowing that in less than 48 hours, their carefully built world would begin to crack, and the foundations beneath them would be shaken to their core. Tuesday dawned gray and drizzly, typical Norfolk weather, as Marshall arrived at the Victorian Town Hall before 6. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of damp earth and old stone. He huddled under the entrance portico alongside his foreman, Andy Morris, a lanky chap with a quick smile and paint-splattered jeans. "The city inspector's been clear," Andy muttered, squinting at the blueprints spread across the hood of the van. "They want us to keep the original woodwork intact. But some of these beams look a bit dodgy." Marshall traced a finger along the faded lines. "We'll reinforce them properly. This building's been standing since the Victorian era. It'll outlast all of us." His phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." Marshall frowned, the words feeling colder than the morning air. That was the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Audit season was always brutal in accountancy, but something in Emma's tone felt different, more distant. BY5. The crew had carefully removed 3 large panels, preserving the intricate wood moldings beneath. Marshall was packing away his tools when the phone rang. Emma's voice came through, thin and tired. "Marshall, I'm going to be later than I thought. Simon wants me to review some files tonight. How late? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Maybe 10 or 11, she sighed, the noise of traffic and muffled voices in the background. Sorry, love. I know we planned to pick kitchen cabinet samples. Don't worry about it. The cabinets can wait. Drive safe. Later, in his workshop, Marshall began sanding a wooden bookshelf for their bedroom. The rhythmic motion calmed his nerves, but a knot of worry twisted in his chest. Emma's recent behavior was unlike her. Stretched thin, yes, but this was different. Not suspicion, no. Trust was the bedrock of their marriage. But concern. At 11:15, headlights swept across the garage windows. Marshall set aside his sandpaper and moved to the kitchen just as Emma appeared, closing the door behind her. The first thing he noticed was her limp. Emma, what happened to your leg? He asked gently. Nothing serious, she said, forcing a smile but clearly favoring her left side. Just clumsy me. Tripped on the uneven pavement outside the office. Let me see. She brushed past him, heading upstairs. It's just a bruise. I'm going to soak it and head to bed. Marshall watched her ascend the stairs, noting the tight grip on the banister. The explanation was plausible. The Old Town Center sidewalks were notorious for their uneven surfaces, but something about her tone reminded him of a contractor trying to hide a structural fault. That he gave her space, finishing up in the workshop before heading upstairs. The bathroom door was closed, but he could hear the bath running. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged in soft cotton pajamas, moving with less stiffness. Feeling better? He asked. Much better, she said, kissing his cheek. Thanks for not fussing. They went to bed, but Marshall lay awake, listening to her breathing. She fell asleep too quickly for someone who wasn't utterly drained. When he was sure she was deep in sleep, he slipped out of bed and went downstairs. Emma's handbags sat abandoned on the kitchen counter. Marshall hesitated. They weren't the kind of couple to snoop, but a nagging worry wouldn't let him rest. He picked up her phone and scrolled through texts and calls. Work messages, a few from her sister, mundane reminders. Nothing unusual. Just as he was about to put it down, a detail caught his eye. The timestamp on her last outgoing call was 6:47 p.m. Nearly 2 hours after she told him she was still working late, and the number wasn't saved in her contacts. Marshall memorized the number, slipped the phone back into her bag, and climbed back into bed, but sleep refused him. In construction, you learn early to trust your instincts about foundations. When something looked wrong, it usually was. The trick was figuring out how bad before everything came crashing down. Wednesday morning brought an unrelenting drizzle that turned the Ashford Town Hall renovation into a careful ballet of tarps and timing. Marshall spent the early hours coordinating with the electrician, but his mind kept drifting back to the mysterious phone call from Emma's phone. By midday, he made a decision. He dialed the number. Branson and Company. This is Simon speaking. Marshall's heart thudded. The voice was polished, smooth. A corporate shark's voice through and through. Hello, Simon. This is Marshall Turner, he said, keeping his tone steady. I was wondering if you could clarify something for me. There was a pause on the line, then a clipped, I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Turner. Marshall hung up, frustration simmering. Why had Emma called her boss at nearly 7 in the evening from an unknown number? What was she not telling him? The afternoon crawled by like a cold fog. Marshall found himself glancing at his phone every few minutes, hoping for a message that would explain it all. Instead, he got a call from Mrs. Jenkins about her faulty garbage disposal. Grateful for the distraction, Marshall promised to take a look that evening. When he arrived home at 6:30, Emma was in the kitchen, still in her work suit, chopping vegetables for dinner. The faint scent of rosemary filled the air. You're home early, Emma said without looking up. Caught up on some plans for the town hall, Marshall replied. Thought I'd help with dinner. Emma gestured toward the dining room. Could you set the table? I want to get this started before the veg turns soggy. As they ate, Marshall tried to read between the lines. Emma spoke about the audit, office politics, and mundane work chatter, but never about the tension he sensed simmering beneath her calm exterior. When she mentioned Simon Branson, it was in passing, like any other colleague. After dinner, Marshall went next door to help Mrs. Jenkins with her disposal. The elderly widow was a beloved figure in the neighborhood, always ready with a kind word and a slice of homemade cake. "It's probably just something stuck," Marshall said, flashlight in hand as he peered beneath the sink. "You're a good neighbor, Marshall." Emma's lucky to have a husband who can fix things. 20 minutes later, with a penny and a couple of bottle caps extracted, Mrs. Jenkins handed Marshall a container of apple pie. "How's Emma?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "I saw her come home last night looking a bit off. Well, not quite off, but she was limping, and her blouse looked rumpled, like she'd been in some kind of scuffle." Marshall's stomach tightened. "Probably just a tough day at the office," Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. "Those corporate types work people too hard." Marshall thanked her and walked home slowly, her words echoing in his mind. By the time he reached the front door, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Emma was in the living room, laptop open, working on spreadsheets. She looked up as he entered. "Mrs. Jenkins okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just a penny stuck in her disposal." Marshall sat across from her, voice steady but firm. "Emma, I need you to be honest with me. What really happened to your leg yesterday?" Her fingers froze on the keyboard. "I told you, I tripped on the pavement." "Mrs. Jenkins saw you come home. She said you looked like you'd been in some kind of struggle." Emma's face drained of color. "Mrs. Jenkins needs new glasses. Show me the bruise." Reluctantly, Emma rolled up her sleeve. The large, dark bruise on her left forearm was roughly the size of a man's hand, and bore the unmistakable pattern of fingers. "Who did this to you?" Marshall asked quietly. "Nobody. I fell," she whispered. "Someone grabbed you hard enough to leave fingerprints." Marshall's voice was calm, but inside a cold fire was rising. "I'm going to ask you one more time. What happened?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me." After a long pause, her composure broke. "Simon. He was angry about some errors in the audit files. He thought I'd messed up and could cost the firm the contract. He yelled, and when I tried to explain, he grabbed my arm. It was only a moment, and then he apologized. It wasn't like he wanted to hurt me." Marshall stood and looked her in the eye. "He put his hands on you, and you covered for him, because you didn't want to cause trouble at work." Emma nodded, wiping away tears. "If I report it, it becomes a legal nightmare. HR, investigations, lawyers. For what? A bruise that'll fade in a week?" Marshall stared out the window at the darkening street. 8 years of marriage, and he'd never seen Emma lie to him before. Not about anything that mattered. The fact she'd protected a man who hurt her told him everything he needed to know about Simon Branson. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Simon Branson here. This is Marshall Turner," he said, voice low and steady. "I want to know what happened in your office yesterday." There was a long pause. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My wife came home with bruises that look like fingerprints. I think there's been a misunderstanding." The friendly tone vanished. "Workplace incidents are internal. I don't discuss them with spouses." "You put your hands on my wife." Emma's name was cold and clipped. "She made errors that cost us a contract. I may have been forceful in expressing my disappointment." Marshall's jaw clenched. "Forceful? What, like grabbing her arm?" "I touched her arm briefly. You want to make a fuss?" The line went silent. Marshall's voice dropped an octave. "Did you just admit you hit my wife?" "Exactly what I said. What are you going to do about it?" Marshall hung up. Behind him, Emma watched with wide, scared eyes. "What did he say?" Marshall looked at his wife. "Brilliant. Trusting the man who just admitted to hitting you." "Marshall, please don't make this worse." But Marshall was already packing a small bag. "You're staying at your sister's tonight." "Marshall, what did he say? Just pack." "Please." As Emma gathered her things, Marshall went to his workshop and opened an old metal toolbox. Beneath the manuals and receipts lay a small black address book he hadn't touched in years. Some numbers you never forget. Some favors you save for when it really matters. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Terry? It's Marshall Turner. I need a favor." Terry Ash arrived precisely at 6 the next morning, stepping out of the misty Norfolk dawn with the same calm, unreadable expression Marshall remembered from years ago. Medium height, lean build, and piercing pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail without judgment. He wore a simple charcoal suit that could have belonged to any insurance adjuster or solicitor, carrying a worn leather portfolio. "Coffee?" Marshall offered as he led Terry into the kitchen. "Black." "Strong," Terry replied, settling at the table and flipping open his portfolio. "You mentioned Simon Branson, the accountant?" "That's right." Terry clicked his pen thoughtfully. "Tell me everything." Marshall recounted the story. The bruises, the admission, the call, the lies Emma had told to protect the man who'd hurt her. Terry listened without interruption, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. "You recorded the call?" "No, but Emma was on the line for my side." "Good. Witnesses matter. What do you want done?" Marshall hesitated. An apology seemed a joke. The police would drag Emma through investigations she didn't want. Civil court would be costly and long. He wanted Simon to understand that actions had consequences, that he'd regret ever touching his wife. Terry nodded. "Regret can be arranged in many forms. How much are we talking?" Marshall's jaw tightened. "Enough that he never dares touch anyone else's wife again." Terry smiled. A slow, rare smile. "Now you're thinking like a problem solver." They spent the morning mapping Simon Branson's world. Finances, relationships, habits, weaknesses. Despite his polished exterior, Simon's lavish lifestyle was propped up by debts and precarious business dealings. He drove a leased Jaguar, lived in a pricey Norwich flat with a mortgage that stretched thin, and was desperate for the upcoming Eastbourne contract to save his firm. His image was everything. He sat on charity boards, attended exclusive city club dinners, and cultivated a reputation as the consummate professional. But Terry's research revealed cracks, hidden debts, unpaid vendors, and a micromanaging boss who couldn't delegate without losing control. "His house of cards is wobbling," Terry said, sliding a dossier across the table. "It won't take much to knock it down." Marshall studied the photographs. Simon leaving his flat, dining at expensive restaurants, shaking hands with local dignitaries. All the trappings of success masking a man on the edge. That afternoon, Marshall called Emma at her sister's house. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Fine," she said, though her voice betrayed exhaustion. "Francis is making me watch rom-coms and eat ice cream. Says it's therapy." "Emma, I know you're angry, but promise me you won't do anything rash. I promise." Marshall looked out the kitchen window at Mrs. Jenkins' warm-lit cottage next door. Normal lives, normal problems like faulty garbage disposals and overgrown gardens. "I won't do anything stupid," he said. "But what I'm planning won't be stupid." Emma was silent for a moment. "I trust you." And for the first time in weeks, Marshall felt the faintest flicker of hope. On Friday afternoon, Marshall met Terry at a cozy cafe tucked away on Norwich's Chapelfield Gardens. Terry sat in a corner booth, sipping black coffee and scanning a newspaper as if he were just another customer escaping the dreary British drizzle. Without preamble, Terry slid a manila folder across the table. "Simon Branson is an interesting man," he began, voice low. Inside the folder were photographs, financial statements, and detailed surveillance notes. "How did you manage all this?" Marshall asked, flipping through the documents. "Mostly public records, property taxes, business licenses, court filings. People leave a lot of breadcrumbs if you know where to look." Terry pointed to highlighted sections. "Simon has 3 weaknesses: money, image, and control. Despite his flashy lifestyle, he's heavily in debt. That Jaguar? Leased. The Norwich flat? Massive mortgage. His firm's revenue is decent but profits are paper-thin. He's juggling debts like a circus act." Marshall nodded grimly. "So he's living on borrowed time." "Exactly. And the Eastbourne audit contract? It's his lifeline." Terry pulled out another set of documents. "His image is everything. Charity boards, exclusive clubs, he can't risk scandal. He micromanages everything. The firm would collapse without him." Marshall studied the surveillance photos. Simon stepping out of his flat, dining at pricey restaurants, smiling at networking events. A man desperately pretending his life was in order. "What's the plan?" Marshall asked. When a house of cards is this fragile, it doesn't take much to topple it, Terry answered with a rare smile. We'll apply pressure where it hurts. That night, Marshall called Emma. When are you coming home? She asked softly. Soon. Just tying up some loose ends. Marshall, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. She was right. The straightforward, hard-working man she married was about to unleash a storm. I love you, he said instead of explaining. Everything will be fine. I promise. Saturday morning, Marshall drove to a storage unit in Gresham, a small, discreet facility just outside Norwich. Inside the unit lay a collection of carefully hidden tools. Untraceable phones, encrypted laptops, and bundles of cash in small denominations. Insurance, just in case. He activated one of the phones and dialed a number Terry had given him. Pacific Investigations, a professional female voice answered. I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding a domestic abuse case, Marshall said, reading from the script Terry had prepared. Are you the victim or a concerned party? Concerned party. My sister-in-law is being abused by her employer. The woman took down details of a fictional case and booked an appointment for the following Tuesday. Over the afternoon, Marshall made 4 more calls to various agencies, each reporting concerns about Simon Branson. Animal welfare received a tip about neglect in his flat, the tax office about irregularities, the local licensing board about professional misconduct. Individually, these reports were minor. Together, they painted a pattern of serious scrutiny. But the real masterpiece was yet to come.